Have you noticed that the legal requirements placed on your product are not always the same, but seem to be designed differently? At the beginning, when you want to bring your product to market, you first need to develop and design the product. You need to create technical specifications and replace these technical specifications, and everything that you then establish on the constructive side will be reviewed by the authority in the first step as part of the approval. This means you have specific legal requirements regarding how your product must be constructed in order to actually receive approval from an approval authority. That is, permission to use this product in vehicles or to bring it directly onto the road. And then comes a second phase where the legal requirements are very similar. They are essentially based on these initial requirements, but they do differ in detail. This means we are then in the next phase of the product life cycle, essentially in the production phase, where there are requirements for conformity of production, or short COP. The requirements that apply there are almost identical in terms of objectives to the requirements for type approval. However, the legislator does not expect you to repeatedly demonstrate what you once showed in the approval during type testing, but you should prove that what is being produced still corresponds to the approved status. And the logical connection behind it is simply that if I check in the type approval whether my basic construction meets the requirements, then I have the basic construction when I go into production. And in production, I naturally have certain influences. From my manufacturing process, influences from machines, influences from the employees. This means that the errors that could arise there are different errors. That's why the testing procedures are different. When you are in the next phase, you have the usage phase. That means your customers use your product and different errors can arise again. Typically, errors arise from the fact that the customer may not fully understand what you intended, how your product is supposed to be used. And we can then identify an abusive use, so to speak. However, you need to distinguish what the intended use is, which you typically describe to the customer with the operating instructions. The maintenance instructions or a repair manual can also be included. Then comes the foreseeable intended use or the foreseeable abusive use. That means you have a use by the customer that is actually not intended or thought of by you, but it should be clear to you that the customer does such things. They can also use the product that way. And then there is the abusive use. That means the customer does something with your product that is not intended at all, that is not possible at all. You may know our example with a chair from another video. Let me take another example. Let's take an example with a hairdryer. So you sell a hairdryer, you have designed a hairdryer, produced it, sold it, and now you have your customers using the hairdryer. The intended use you have in mind is that the hairdryer is used for drying hair. Now, it is predictable that someone might say they are drying their pants. This means you need to think about whether you need to do something to prevent the pants from catching fire or the hairdryer from breaking because someone gets too close to the pants and effectively reduces the airflow for the hairdryer too much, which could cause the hairdryer to overheat. It would be misuse, of course, if someone sits in the bathtub and uses the hairdryer there. So, as the manufacturer of such a hairdryer, you would not have the requirement to make the hairdryer waterproof. Or that you have to operate it with low voltage, that the voltage is unproblematic, but what you as a manufacturer do is issue a clear warning. This means including warning notices in the user manual, perhaps putting a corresponding sticker on the hairdryer, so that the user is clear that if they do something like this, it is misuse and then it is not covered by your liability. And with the term liability, we are exactly at the corresponding regulation that applies from a legal standpoint. So you have the issue of product safety and product liability with your products when they are in use. Additionally, you have further requirements if you have a product that requires approval. This means that you are also legally obligated to conduct market observation and product observation in parentheses, but this applies to every product. You must assess whether a suspected defect could conflict with your PO approval if you identify one. This means you may have a non-conformity. And then you also have the requirement to recall, whereby these recall requirements are generally legally regulated for automotive products, but specific requirements apply regarding how you handle these risks or potential product defects and how you then recall these products and rectify the defect. This means you have 3 phases for your product. Different legal requirements apply in each of these phases. In the phase where you develop the product and have the first prototypes, you have the requirements for the approval of the products, which describe how it must be designed. Then you have the production phase, where you manufacture your product in series, and you have corresponding legal requirements on how you must conduct a monitoring process to assess whether the products, as you produce them, are still compliant with what has been approved. And then you have the usage phase, where you typically have the general legal regulations for market surveillance, recalls, product liability, and product safety. But there are specific regulations for automotive products